I'm good, how are Luke?
Villa's current model, this wage to revenue, scrap PSR and let's go to SCR now, which is the UEFA rule. So what's your thoughts on clubs in general making fans pay more? Does it make that much of a difference? Stadium naming rights, selling the women's team. So how can Villa get more revenue than what? Hello and welcome back to Up the Villa. We've got a special episode today talking about those dreaded three words twice. We're joined by Kieran Maguire. So Villa fans, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Smash the likes. Let's try and get 1,000 and comment your thoughts. Kieran, how you doing?
I'm good, how are Luke? I'm not watching the Club World Cup. Don't know about you. I think I'm suffering from football fatigue. But yeah, keeping busy with the transfer and the PSR craziness, which people seem to think I know a lot more about than I actually do.
Well, I'm not going to lie, Kieran. June, I used to like June, but the last 2 Junes have been pretty miserable for a Villa fan, hearing certain players leaving and us having to turn our attention to football finances. So I kind of want to get your thoughts firstly on Villa's current model, this wage to revenue, very high on wages. What are your thoughts on the way that Villa are operating at the minute?
Well, I think this is a function of the new owners coming in and investing substantial amounts in the squad, which is what you want as fans. They want Aston Villa to be a success on the pitch. And we know that if you sign the right players, and the right players don't normally come cheap, then it is expensive. But there is a bit of a drag in terms of if you take a look at Villa's match day income, for example, they're probably getting £1.5 million per match. They're getting £28 million in 2024. I'd expect that to go up in 2025. Because of the success in getting to the Champions League and the prices that we've been charged. But it's still £100 million less than Manchester United. It's still £100 million less than Spurs. And you have to run to stand still. So the way that the rules are written disadvantages, in my view, a club such as Villa, and I include Newcastle and perhaps Forest there as well, clubs who you would call ambitious stroke aspirational, the clubs that want to break that glass ceiling that we presently see in Premier League football to challenge for trophies. And I think that's good. I'm an old bloke. I remember Villa from winning the old First Division and getting to the Champions League and winning the European Cup, and Forest doing the same, and even Derby County doing the same, and so on. And I always thought that was good for football. What we are starting to see too much of is a closed shop. So Villa's a breath of fresh air, but the rules make it really difficult for them. So the money coming into the club is substantially up. It was £112 million the first season back in the Premier League. It was 275 in 2024. I'd expect it to exceed 300 million in 2025. But the wages have tripled as well. So I think that's the problem. The investment in players has matched and in some ways has accelerated the money coming in. And that's why we had a PSR squeeze last season, which resulted in players having to be sold. And that's sort of acting as an anchor, holding Aston Villa back as far as this summer is concerned a wee bit as well. And the club deserves credit for thinking outside of the box and signing players on loan and shifting those players who perhaps you could get very good prices for in the January window and so on.
How close do you think Villa are? Because I saw that graphic and Villa look like the only ones that are in the red. So where are we at?
Well, we don't know the wages for 24-25. There's lots of people saying, "Oh yeah, I'm in the know," but I don't know how much individual players are getting as bonuses for qualifying for the Champions League next season. We don't know how much the new players are getting in. We don't know how much additional revenue. But I think there is a general perception that potentially that if they perhaps need to get one player out of the door by the 30th of June. And if that book's somewhere in the region of 15 to 20 million pounds, then they're clear. So that's sort of the good news. As far as 25-26 is concerned, again, it's sort of streamlining the wage bill. You've got some players who will be out of contract, make wee savings there. There will be a reset in terms of wages because you get less for qualifying for the Europa League if you're a player than compared to the Champions League, and that's because the Champions League is where the money's at. So I think that there has to be a little bit of a reset. But can Aston Villa sign players? Yes, they can. Can they spend £250 million on players? People say, well, yeah, Villa have never spent that before. Yeah, they spent 204 million in 21-22. They spent 156 million in 29-20. They spent 168 million in 23-24. So Villa have been spending big money. Can they match that this season? Perhaps not. But there's also a case for saying, well, hold on, Villa have bought so well in recent years that perhaps they don't need to spend those huge levels on players, especially if they use the loan market successfully, and also if they rely on the fact that they've got players who are coming through who have got 1 more year's further experience. The manager's developing those players, and on the back of that, they can be successful.
So would you say this model that we've got isn't sustainable long term? We're doing well to navigate sort of the current situation.
Yeah, I think, Villa have punched above their weight. They've invested incredibly well. That they were promoted with a squad that cost £120 million in 2018-19. That squad now, you add all of the players together, it's well over £500 million, probably somewhere to the region of 600 million. And that sounds like a lot of money, but then Chelsea have got a squad that have cost 1.5 billion. City's squad probably around about 1.3. Manchester United probably about 1.2. So they're catching up with the likes of Spurs and Arsenal. So they're catching on sort of the coattails of the big six, for want of a better phrase. But PSR makes it very difficult, which I don't think is fair for Villa. It's not fair on them. It's not fair on Newcastle either. There are ways of working around this to ensure sustainability. If the Villa owners or the Newcastle owners said, we will put £250 million into a pot for a sustainability pot, so if we decide to walk away, that's enough to pay the costs for the next 12, 18 months, then I don't really see why clubs shouldn't be allowed to do that. So Villa have done spectacularly well and deserve all of the credit that's come their way for getting into Europe, and also as a neutral playing damn good football, which people forget about.
We do.
It's almost as if the football, what you're seeing on the pitch, doesn't exist. Watching Villa is great fun, but
we want it to keep being fun, though.
Yeah. The PSR rules make it that much more difficult.
Definitely. So we can scrap PSR and let's go to SCR now, which is the UEFA rules. So I think this is the area where there's a little bit of confusion between the two. So what is SCR?
Okay, you're absolutely right, Luke. Under PSR, which is the Premier League's rules, you're allowed to lose £105 million over 3 years, but you've got add backs for academy. Villa's academy, we reckon, is probably about 18 million a year. So you can probably add back 50 or 60 million there. You can add back infrastructure costs. Villa are probably looking at 15, 20 million pounds there. You can add back the community scheme. You can add back the women's team and so on. So there are add backs. But you're only allowed to lose 105 mil over 3 years. So that has been a squeaky bum last season. SCR rules effectively say, let's take all of the money we've got from ticket sales, all of the money we've got from broadcast, all of the money we've got from the sponsorship deals and so on. And they were good for 24, 25. Plus, we'll effectively take player sale profits, and we'll take either last year or the average of the last 2 years or the average of the best last 3 years, whatever looks best for Villa. So that's a positive from UEFA. And you can spend 70% of that on player wages. Now, we don't know how much the player wages are. We reckon it's probably around about 3/4 of the total wage bill, plus transfer fee amortisation. For people not familiar, that sign a player for 50 million on a 5-year contract, that works out as a cost of 10 million a year. If we take a look at Villa's figures, it's costing them, thick end of 100, probably over 100 million pounds a year in amortisation. So you've got your wages 250, you've got your player amortisation another 100, it's 350, plus that's probably about it. You can only spend 70% of the money coming in on those, broadly those two items, and a couple of adjustments as well. I think Villa could be struggling to satisfy that. That's the bad news. The good news, Barcelona were probably about €250 million over the limit last season, and they got fined buttons. I think they got fined half a million euro. So I think as a first-time offender, yes, there will be repercussions, but they're not. It's not points being taken away because it's the Europa League is, whilst they call it a league, it's more of a cup competition, as we know. And UEFA want clubs like Villa, they want clubs like Barcelona. They want the big clubs to be in it because it's a flagship competition. So I think for first-time offenders, you tend to get a fine. If you keep doing it, they reserve the right to have more draconian penalties, but we're a long way from that.
So Villa moving into sort of like next year's set of financials, we will have the Champions League money that go into that as well. So would you say Villa financially should be in a lot better position than what, we grew from the year before? So do you think we could be in a good position next year?
Well, by the end of 26, potentially, I think the downside is that the sale of Jack Grealish dropped out of the equation as far as the 3 years to the 30th of June 2025 is concerned. So, that was really beneficial because Villa, because he's a local lad, academy player, that's effectively almost £100 million worth of profit, which covered the 3 years up to June 24. So that's dropped out of the equation, which makes things more difficult. The additional revenues from the Champions League are the positive. So there's a plus and there's a minus at the same time. So I still think Villa have to be a wee bit cautious. Another thing to notice as far as the SCR rules are concerned, the UEFA rules, they're based on the calendar year. So you've got your final group games as far as the Champions League is concerned, plus you've got the knockout rounds as well, and the additional prize money from that. There will also, of course, be the group games in Europe that Villa have got coming up in 25, 26. That will bring in additional revenue. But for every £100 that you get in the Champions League, you're probably getting about 22 from the Europa League. So it's not very lucrative. And I was in conversation with a Premier League club, and they say, unless we get to the semi-finals of the Europa League, you're not really making any money. And then, of course, you start to get a bit giddy because if you get to the semi-finals, the excitement is win the damn thing. Hey, brilliant for fans. We forget about fans. We forget about football and all this nonsense. But hey, brilliant for fans, which is the good news. And of course, as we've seen with Spurs, it's completely transformed their season in the sense that they qualified for the Champions League for next season. So it's okay, Europa League, but you've also got that Sunday, Thursday routine, and that has an impact upon playing performance in the Premier League. And every position in the Premier League is worth £3.5 million in prize money. So if I was talking to a club and they say, well, we got into the Europa League, we budgeted to drop 4 positions in the Premier League, and by the time you factor that in, the Europa League is one for the fans. That's what football should be about. We shouldn't be having this conversation, Luke. Football's there to put a smile on our face rather than me getting divorced because I spend more time on a spreadsheet than with my wife.
So we'll stick with the fans then. So last season, Villa had very high Champions League ticket prices. Season tickets this season have gone up by 5%, some more for other people that have to move seats for stadium work. What's your thoughts on clubs in general making fans pay more? And the question I want to ask you is, does it make that much of a difference per fan if they club charge X amount of money, or could they be a bit more sort of like lower the price for the fans?
It's a really difficult one because, as an economist, I'd say if Villa can sell out all of their tickets at 40 quid, and they can sell all of their tickets out at 45, and they can sell all their tickets out at 50, well, the logic is you charge 50. Why sell the? But for those boys and girls who have been in the Holt End for the last 30 or 40 years and who were supporting Villa through the lean times, it does seem very harsh, given that the club is owned by billionaires, to expect them to stick their hand in their pocket. At the same time, Villa's yield from tickets is pretty low by Premier League standards. So the owners will say, look, we've stuck hundreds of millions into the club. We expect you to put your hands in your pockets as well. So I can sort of understand it from their point of view. But a billionaire putting their hands in their pockets for even for a few hundred million is a hell of a lot different from the likes of you and I doing something similar in terms of what we've got left to play with after our rent's going up, our food bills going up, our transport costs are going up. I think it impacts upon fans. And we often give this phrase, football's the most important of the unimportant things in life. And your season ticket and the opportunity to see Villa play the likes of Bayern Munich, which you might have been there. I can still, I'm not a Villa fan, I can still remember the move where Peter Withe scored, and that's from, 40 odd years ago. Because that gets etched in your memories, and you want to be able to replicate that opportunity to see it again. And you do feel to a certain extent that the fans are being a wee bit rinsed, but the club does need to make sure that it qualifies under PSR. And this is one way of achieving that, even though it seems very harsh.
I'd like to get your thoughts now on a rumour that's going round, and get your thoughts on this sort of thing in general. So, stadium naming rights. I feel like a few years ago that was a pretty big thing. Would that make much of a difference to Aston Villa or not?
Potentially, it could. I mean, if somebody, especially if it's going to be a complete redevelopment of the of Villa Park, the fact that some of the stands were, very strangely named after Doug Ellis. My understanding was that somebody said, let's name one of the stands after you, Doug. And Doug said, well, I don't think I should be at this meeting. Instead, I'll leave the decision to be made by my son and my solicitor. So are there opportunities to do that? Yes. But Villa Park is an emotional title for Villa fans. It's what you grew up with when you first went along to that match, whether it was with your mum, your dad, your grandfather, your uncle, your best friend from school. And I think for an established stadium like Villa, persuading people to call it by a new name is actually very difficult. And sponsors are aware of that as well. I'm actually a cricket fan as well. For me, it's the Oval. I never refer to it as the Kia Oval. So unless you've got that value in the stadium when it first opens, as perhaps we've seen at the Emirates and we've seen at some of the other stadiums, then what you tend to find is either A, you don't get very much, or the value tends to decrease quite quickly. So those are sort of the downsides. And the fact that you've even got the owners of clubs like Liverpool who are very much focused on the finances, and FSG, they're extremely good at what they've done. They've said, we don't think there's any value in trying to rename Anfield because it will always be known as Anfield. Spurs are desperately trying to get people to call their stadium the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium because it's such a horrible thing to pronounce that they still feel that they've got value. But I know that they were close to a stadium namings, right? And then somebody got a bit greedy. I won't name who that person is. Somebody got a bit greedy at Spurs, and the deal fell through. And now that they've been there sort of 5 or 6 years, people go, I still call it White Hart Lane because it's still at White Hart Lane. So I think it's one of those things which is overplayed. We've seen Everton have the naming rights for their new stadium, which is opening, but then it has to be called something. The Hill Dickinson Stadium.
It's not got a good ring to it, has it?
It's not got it. So I think there's got to be something a bit snappier than that for it to work.
Yeah, and then the next one then would be, obviously, because we're involved in like PSIs, like selling the women's team. So Chelsea did it. Do you feel like that pattern could carry on? Because I think there was like a rule. It's the rule. They couldn't do it for the rules, could they? So sort of, can we do that, or is there value in that for Villa? Yes,
there was the opportunity to outlaw it. My dog's about to start barking, by the way. Okay. There's an opportunity to outlaw that about 2 weeks ago at a meeting of Premier League chief executives, and there was so much opposition that the Premier League didn't even try to put it to a vote. So that flexibility, for want of a phrase, to do a Chelsea still exists, and clubs can therefore replicate that. Villa did get the benefit of they had a compulsory purchase order in respect of some of the real estate assets that they had, which went through for HS2. Could they sell any other spare properties they've got to someone else in the Villa group? Yes, they can. Can they put that through as a profit? Yes, they can. I mean, Chelsea made £198 million on a £200 million sale. So it was in Chelsea's books at 2 million. They sold it for 200. So that went into their PSR calculation. They made another 60 odd from selling a hotel and a car park to themselves. So yes, provided you don't take the mickey with the price, although everybody's looking at Chelsea and going 200 mil for a club that had a crowd of 2,500 at Kings Meadow in March seems a bit steep to me. And to be fair to Chelsea, the women's team is fantastic. Nobody's denying that, but 200 mil intuitively seems pretty pricey.
So what would you do? Would you just slightly overinflate it and then?
Yeah, I'd go for what I think I could get away with and then negotiate down with the Premier League, which appears to be the Chelsea style.
Thank you. Right. So my final question then is, how can Villa get more revenue then? What are the ways in which we can do that?
Well, progress in the Europa League, having those matches, expanding Villa Park, or I don't know whether there is a nuclear option in terms of a new stadium. Have you been to Spurs Stadium?
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is amazing, and also it's geared to, from the minute you get there to the minute you leave, it's geared to emptying your wallet. It's a bit like Disneyland. If I take the kids to Disneyland, you just go, okay, just take my credit card and I'll just cry for the next 3 hours. So that's the advantage of having a 21st century stadium. Now, whether the owners want to go down that particular route or whether it's going to be an expansion of Villa Park, which appears to be probably more on the cards at present. But and I know, Luke, that Villa could play in front of 60,000 a week because you've got a huge waiting list of people that want to see the club playing, and you say playing good football, good manager. The owners seem to understand what it's like as well. I think there are lots of positives, so that would be one way of doing that. And And if you don't do that, then you've got Manchester United potentially moving to a 100,000 capacity stadium. Although I don't think that will happen. I think they'll probably cap it at 85. You've got Liverpool at 60 plus, City moving to 60 plus. You've got 3 clubs in London. Leeds are expanding. Newcastle are probably. If you don't do that, you're going to fall behind. And then you're going to have this problem every single year whilst we have PSR or something of that equivalent. So it's a big decision to make as far as the owners are concerned, because they've got to provide the funding for it, or a lot of the funding for it. You might be able to borrow, but interest rates have gone up and so on. So it would be that much more difficult.
Thank you, Kieran. It's been great having you on with your vast amount of knowledge. So hopefully you're making the Villa fans feel a little bit better about what you've been talking about. So thank you very much, mate.
All the best. Well, yeah, and have a great summer. And fixtures are out on Wednesday, so we can forget about all of this finance nonsense and concentrate on planning a few away trips. And then, of course, the kits come out, and we turn ourselves into Gokwan and Trini and Susanna for 24 hours.
I've got a new bit of Villa merch on right now, so there we go.
Terrific.